A month ago, as I'm filming, and probably 2 months ago by the time this comes up, Reading with Tatiana tagged me in a Picture This book tag. I figured it was about time I got around to sharing that. Prompt number 1, Love You Forever by Robert Munsch and illustrated by Sheila McGraw. Name a book you imagine you'll love forever. And there are so many like this. I guess if we're pulling back from childhood, I'm gonna say stuff like Alana and the Lioness, Anne of Green Gables, The Phantom Tollbooth, Island of the Blue Dolphins. These are just a couple of the books that really solidified me as a reader in 5th, 6th, 7th grade. I don't know, I feel like childhood books kind of burn brightest. Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, Very Bad Day by Judith Viorst and illustrated by Ray Cruz. Which books or comforting things do you turn to when you're having a bad day? It kind of depends on how I'm having a bad day. Certainly Willow is one of those big comfort. And sometimes I like to zone out with slice of life video games as well. If we're talking about books specifically, again, it really depends. The past couple of years, I have been going back to The Deadly Dragon Duet by Colette Rhodes, just because it is a simple 2-book story that sort of got all the feels of the protagonist. She starts in a bad place. She gets rescued. That's not the life she wants. So she leaves those people, goes on her own arc to get the kind of catharsis she needs, and then she's able to meet back up with those people who rescued her and actually form a real relationship and meet them on their terms and her own terms. I've also got a couple horror stories I really like listening to or returning to if I'm having a hard time. One of them is a creepypasta called Mayhem Mountain by C.T. Walker, and I listen to that here on YouTube. Creeps McPasta does an audio version of it that I sort of enjoy. I also really like The Last Sin Eater by T.J. Lee and the audio that's done by Romnex here on YouTube. But T.J. Lee is an author that has a ton of creepypasta, no-sleep style stories that have audio versions both from Romnex and The Dark Somnia, and I listen to those playlists back and forth quite frequently, both because I think the audio is done really well, but also the story is just very compelling and interesting and has great catharsis in it. 3 is The Very Hungry Caterpillar by Eric Carle. Which book, series, or character sparked your hunger for reading? You know, I was always really invested in reading as a kid. It's just something I really liked to do. When it actually came time for me to learn to read myself, it was something I struggled with in those early grade school years. One of the reasons I think that is they have these Nate and the Great Detective and the Babysitter's Club in all of the library circulation for kids to read, and I just couldn't care less about those style of stories. I'm not into the Hardy Children or the Boxcar Children or any of those standard stories that you would encourage a young child to read. Just not for me. I think something that really helped me push through that time is probably the Serendipity series. The stories themselves I don't remember at all, but the stunning illustrations are something that stood out to me and that I really liked. I was also a huge fan of stories about animals, so I loved the Howlday Inn and the Howlday Inn series. I Houdini was another favorite one of mine. That one was about a hamster that escaped a lot. I was a pretty big fan of Ralph and the Motorcycle. That was around at that time. Number 4 is going to be Green Eggs and Ham by Dr. Seuss. What is the most unusual book you've read? You know, honestly, I tend to think of my books as pretty normal, average reading. Maybe 6th grade when I read The Prince of Wales by R.L. Fisher. I didn't think anything about it at the time because it was a story our whole class was reading, but it's about a whale prince, which I guess for starters is weird that whales have a prince and a whole monarchy society, but he has the power of dream singing, and he uses it to fight against hunters to save whales and people. 6th grade was sort of a year of experimentation for me. I read The Phantom Tollbooth then too, which is a bit of a topsy-turvy world like Alice in Wonderland, except it makes more sense and has literary references. I also read The Devil's Arithmetic that year, which is about a girl who's living in modern day and celebrating Passover, and she gets faint during the Passover celebration and blacks out and wakes up as her great-great-grandmother in the middle of the Holocaust and has to experience that, and then wakes back up over in Passover and everything is fine. So that's kind of a weird one. Now that I'm thinking about it. Where the Wild Things Are by Maurice Sendak. What is your favorite book featuring the natural world? I really like the human versus wild conflict, so so especially as a child, I read a lot like that. I don't know if I can pick a favorite. I'm quite a big fan of Where the Red Fern Grows and Rascal. I also really love Call of the Wild. Surprisingly, as someone who's read a lot of werewolf and shifter books, there's not a lot of them I can think of where like the wild is integrated in a way that like really feels fully realized. It's part of why I think so many of those books have a lot of potential and end up only in like 3-star land. And the Trespass collection that I reviewed last year has a bunch of short novellas. All of them like connect really well to the wild and different environments you can find across the world too, not just like forests. Goodnight Moon by Margaret Wise Brown, illustrated by Clement Hurd. Do you read at bedtime, and did anyone ever read to you at bedtime? Yes, sometimes I still read at bedtime. I've turned that in more for like listening to YouTube before I go to bed, but I should get back to reading because I do find that like the blue light from the iPad sort of keeps me awake. As far as did anyone ever read to me? Yes. People read to me all the time, bedtime. My dad would come and read to all of us kids, and we'd like huddle together on the same bed. And when it was back in the day of like picture books, we'd take turns with whose turn it was to pick out the book. And when we got to chapter books, it was something that like we'd sort of mutually agree on. He'd read chapters to us at a time until my sister and brother would fall asleep. Usually I would stay awake and have to go to bed afterwards on my own. But I mean, it was a great bonding time, I think, for all of us together. Guess How Much I Love You by Sam McBratney and illustrated by Anita Jarem. Who had the biggest influence on you as a reader? You know, probably my friends. I can remember maybe in like 4th or 5th grade, I was still going through the Roald Dahl collection and getting a little bit bored of it when my friend had mentioned that she started reading Alana the Lioness, and that got me into Tamara Pierce and into fantasy as a category. And she was always a couple books ahead of me and giving me the spoilers because I have always loved spoilers and wanted to hear all about it. And it was just something that we did together, reading and following up. And then like when I got into high school, manga and anime were a big thing, and we were always recommending different mangas. And even like the anime we liked to watch, because it was really hard to get a hold of anime at that time, it was actually much easier to get the manga volumes. We'd acknowledge like this anime is good or this anime is popular, and then we'd go buy the manga volumes or go ask our library for them. Miss Liz, who was the librarian focused in the children's room in my particular library, had a huge influence. You always knew if she was there, you could go ask her. When I went into adulthood, all of the librarians were very good with that. I could be like, I just finished this, I love it, what else is like this? And they would take me to more from that author or to similar genres or just like a whole host of things like that. And they were always very enthusiastic to do that too. And then last but not least is The Giving Tree by Shel Silverstein. Which book or books would you give to an emerging reader? Which books have you given as a gift more than one? I have a young nephew right now who is still in his baby phases. Not that that stopped me from giving him books. And I started out with like some basic cloth books, you know, to get him used to like the open and close and because he's teething and stuff like that. But I've also got him Corduroy, Boom Chicka Boom, The Hungry Caterpillar, How the Grinch Stole Christmas, The Polar Express, The Snow Day, Peter Rabbit, The Velveteen Rabbit, The Pokey Puppy. And there's so many others that I'm excited to get for him and to read to him because I love books, and I think there's a ton of wonderful children's stories, both classic and new, out there and ready to be explored. As far as the book that I have given the most as a gift, it's going to be The Little Prince by Saint-Exupéry. This one is one I've given the most because it's something that I give as a graduation gift. A lot of people will give The Places You'll Go, which I think is also a great graduation gift, but for me, The Little Prince hits a personal note for me. It's something that like really inspired and moved me when I read it first in the 5th grade. And it was also the first longer book that I actually read in its original French. And it has a special place in my heart. And I think it sparks an element of optimism and imagination that we desperately need to hold on to in our lives today. So yeah, that's going to be the picture book tag. If you've got this far and you haven't done it yet, consider yourself tagged. Again, I want to thank Reading with Tatiana for tagging me in this. It's been a lot of fun. I just did this one kind of off the cuff, so if I forgot any books or forgot details of the books, please forgive me. Thanks for watching, and as always, keep reading. Bye!